Hello and welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm John Molesky. Our guest today is Merissa Khurma. Merissa is project manager of Middle East Special Initiative at the Wilson Center, and she joins us to discuss her exciting new project that just launched, a blog featuring voices of women in the Middle East. It's named Enheduanna. And I want to start there because there's an interesting story behind the name of the blog.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yes, Enheduanna is from Mesopotamia, from the 23rd century BC, and she's the first penned woman poet.
And the first to sign her name to anything, first person to sign her name to something that we can trace to.
Exactly. Historians have identified her as the first named author.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It is fascinating. So I thought it would be appropriate to name a blog featuring women from the Middle East after her.
The first author.
The first author, exactly. She's from the region.
Yeah.
And so it's it's an inspiration to all the contributors.
And an iconic figure, a daughter of a king and high priestess of a goddess and a god.
Yes.
Yeah, quite a story behind the name. And so what is the purpose of the blog? What is the goal?
The goal is to really give women from the Middle East a platform to talk about the challenges they face in their countries and their societies, being women, whether they're legal challenges or economic or social, but also talk about the work that they're doing. We have women contributors who are from the public sector, who are from the private sector, and from the social and civil society sector. So women are everywhere in the region. They are at the forefront of these efforts to try to change their own situation. And so we wanted to hear it from them. We wanted to get the stories from them. And this is a platform for them to do so.
What was the genesis of the project? How did it come about in the first place?
Well, we have a Middle East Women Initiative that we will be launching soon. And we thought, given March is Women's History Month and International Women's Day falls on March 8th, this is a good opportunity to sort of kick it off.
Yes.
And also try to understand what is happening in the region when it comes to women's rights and the empowerment of women. Unfortunately, the Middle East and North Africa region continues to, as I said in my introductory piece, to be at the top list of the worst faring ratings when it comes to gender parity. So, for example, according to the Gender Gap Index, which the World Economic Forum publishes every year, the Middle East is ranked last when it comes to health, education, political participation, and the workforce. Many countries have managed to close the gender gap in education. In many countries, including the UAE, Qatar, and Jordan, where I'm from, there are more women in tertiary education than men. However, this is not translating into the workforce. So
even in those countries, though,
I mean, in the UAE,
is it cultural? What are the barriers?
There are barriers that are socio-cultural. So we can put them in a bucket and call it social norms, and those differ from, I think, one country to another. But of course, for women entrepreneurs, for example, access to finance is a challenge for many women, particularly in the Levant and the North Africa region. I think women in the Gulf have more access to finance, and so you see more women entrepreneurs in some of the Gulf Arab countries. There are some legal and structural barriers as well. But something that I always say, John, even if we change the laws, we have to make sure that the laws are being implemented. And we go back to behavioral changes. So social change has to be, like the legal reform has to be done in parallel with all this sort of behavioral and attitudinal changes, because those are adaptive, processes. It's an iterative process. So you cannot change people's minds about the right of women to work overnight.
Right.
You can change the law, but you can't change
the way you describe that reminds me of the conundrum during the American Civil Rights Movement, where Martin Luther King Jr. on one side trying to change hearts and minds, and Thurgood Marshall on the inside trying to change the law.
Yes, and these efforts have to be done in parallel, and we see so many women really working on both fronts. So one of our contributors was the Minister of Planning from Jordan, Merissa Khurma, and she talked about what the government is doing. She heads, for example, an interministerial committee to try to streamline all gender issues, in the cabinet. And they put a target to increase the number of women in the workforce by 2020 or 2022. And then you have civil society organizations who are making sure that some of these laws that are encouraging women to, participate in the economy are being implemented by working with the local communities. So these efforts have to be done in parallel.
How are you recruiting your contributors to the blog?
So we are coordinating with some of the Arab embassies here in Washington. I also have a network through grad school and my work in the region that I've tapped into, and the Wilson Center has a huge network of scholars, many fellows that have come and gone through the Wilson Center. Were very helpful in trying to connect us with some of the activists.
No shortage of initial contributors.
Absolutely not.
And but how will you keep the water flowing?
Well, I think for the month of March, the focus will be, what are the challenges when it comes to women's rights? So we have, from Yemen to Sudan to Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, UAE, and others. Many different contributors have talked about where they're at and what's going on in their own societies. I think after March, what we want to do is try to get women contributors to talk about other issues, foreign policy issues, national security issues, economic issues. So we don't want to confine women to only talking about women's issues, because really women are everywhere in different sectors and they have a voice, and we want to be able to give them that opportunity to talk about the work that they're doing.
Makes sense. And so what has been the initial response? I know as we sit here, it's been less than a week since the blog launched, but what is the initial feedback that you've
Well, the initial response has been very positive. I think particularly for women such as Rasha Jarhum from Yemen, who has co-founded the Women's Solidarity Group of Yemeni women trying to basically make sure that they have a seat at the negotiating peace table. For them, this is a great opportunity to have their story out there. And so we've received really good feedback, including from other contributors as well and other readers. So this is just the start, and we still have a long way to go and a lot more room for a lot more voices. So we hope that to continue.
You talk about the index and what it shows about regionally, but within the region, it's never even. And where do you see the most opportunities for dynamic change?
I think the opportunities are everywhere.
Everywhere.
Absolutely.
Even in places that might not immediately emerge as obvious choices.
Absolutely, including countries such as Syria and Yemen that have and continue to see sort of war and destruction. In Syria, for example, according to UN figures, a third of households are headed by women currently. And these women are the caretakers, they're contributing to, they're the breadwinners, they're contributing to their local economies. And so they have taken a completely different role. So they're owning businesses, they run their businesses from the home. We see the same phenomenon amongst Syrian women in some of the refugee camps or refugee communities in Lebanon and in Jordan and in Turkey. So I think that women will, whenever the opportunity arises, and sometimes necessity is the mother of invention, right? And we see women really committing to this and being resilient in the face of challenges.
Is this a moment, Merissa, or is some kind of tipping point been reached in this regard?
I hope so. I mean, I'm very hopeful because I see that regardless of the challenges and regardless of the settings, whether you're in a stable, politically stable country or you're in the middle of a war zone, women are really taking up this fight, and they are again at the forefront of this fight. So I'm hopeful, and I think that the future is feminine in the Middle East. So we'll see how it goes.
If you'd like to read the blog or subscribe and receive updates when new posts are made, if you come to wilsoncenter.org, under the Explore tab, you can find a listing of blogs. Click on it, and it always becomes very obvious to you after that point. So I don't know, are you prepared to give us any more information on upcoming parts of the project? Or I don't know, I don't want to ask you to prematurely announce things, but
I think we've seen the Global Women's Leadership Index launched here at the Wilson Center and really shedding light on women's leadership and the challenges, but putting a target also for reaching 50% parity in women's leadership. So What we want to do next is focus on the Middle East and try to make sure that more countries from the Middle East are included in the index in order to learn more about, well, what is it that we need to look at? I mean, it's a fantastic tool for policymakers to see, well, how do we fix this? How do we get more women in leadership positions, not only in ministerial positions, but also at the subnational level with decision-making power, and that's also key.
Yeah, everybody loves metrics.
Yes,
in
yes.
this day and age. Merissa, thank you very much, and congratulations on a dynamic first step.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now, and that you'll join us again for future episodes. Until then, for all of us at the Wilson Center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for joining us.